All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me this Saturday morning for me, or if you're watching this later, thanks for tuning in then. Hope you guys had an amazing Thanksgiving if you celebrated it. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about Nutritive Cycle Theory, otherwise known as what inputs to give your plants when and why. Appreciate you guys tuning in. And gals, huge thanks to everyone who purchased the book recently or ever. Please send me a review when you get the chance. I genuinely appreciate the support. You guys are so kind. You can grab the book in ebook or paperback now. Great Christmas gift. Great anytime gift. Email me if you're unable to access it for some reason. It might be your browser that doesn't support the download, or maybe you've got cookies that are stopping it from being downloaded. A couple people have had that problem, but it is available. It's been out for about a month, which is awesome. So yeah, post in the chat where you're joining in from and what zone you're growing in. If you want to get crazy, you could share a little bit about your growing operation, the deets, the square footage or acreage that you're growing on. Would love to hear that. And let's just get straight into it. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about the nutritive cycle theory, and then we'll get into some questions that I got this past week that are kind of related to the topic. So I'll start by just going over the conventional approach to giving your plants nutrients. And this is an interesting one because there's so many different entities that are telling you exactly what nutrients your plants need at different times. And some fertilizer companies say it's just a basic all-purpose NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. They might have gotten that backwards. Nope, I got it. NPK. You just need that exact ratio, like a 10-10-10, or maybe a little lower dose, 4-4-4, all of that. But there's a lot of problems with the recommendations that these fertilizer companies give. And one of them is that they claim that certain plants need different amounts of different nutrients, which is not untrue. But then if you just something that I recommend you do is if you just like Amazon search tomato fertilizer or rose fertilizer or whatever, you'll see that the NPK ratios are different for like every single brand, which doesn't make any sense. If they're supposedly going to tell you exactly what tomatoes need, then it should be fairly consistent, for instance, or roses or whatever. But a lot of the companies will say, we know the exact amount, and so we're going to tell you. And then what you do basically is, you're spreading these fertilizers on your soil, or you're dissolving it in water beforehand and watering it into your plants. And these are supplying a fast nutrient release. So these are what we call water soluble nutrients, and they're just chemicals in the raw form. And then there's maybe some, like if you look in your Miracle Grow package, it'll maybe say that there's a slow release minerals coming out, and those are coated in a polymer that just gradually dissolves and maybe mildly contaminates your soil. And that's the only reason that they're like a slow release. They might have a couple different like organic meals bound up in there, but pretty much synthetic fertilizers are like, the game plan is, let's just nourish the soil with nutrients in raw form, and then we will and then your plants will just do well. And so you use your spreaders, like the little things that you crank and it shoots out fertilizer. You do that maybe every month or so throughout the growing season, or like I said, you can dissolve it in water and fertigate it out. So that's the conventional approach. And there's a lot of problems with that we talk about in a lot of our videos. Maybe I can answer some questions if you've got questions about why exactly that might harm your soil biology. But on the other hand, we've got the organic approach, which is much better. And that's like when you apply compost or manure or even organic meals are a lot better. And these are supplying less water soluble nutrients, meaning that if they dissolve in water, they're not going to just supply the soil with those raw chemicals like your nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. They actually need to be processed beforehand by microbes. So I got a question. Maybe I'll actually cover this a little bit later. Just very recently, about applying worm castings to the soil, for instance. And people, when they apply compost or worm castings to the soil, wonder, are the nutrients going to leach out if I put it on too early? And that's because they're thinking in terms of the conventional approach that these are synthetic fertilizers, or that it's a fertilizer at all. Really what's happening is, as you guys probably know if you've followed this channel, you're feeding the soil biology, and that the soil microbes are what process the water insoluble nutrients from the organic matter into plant available nutrients. That could sound a little bit complicated. So I'm just going to say it again. So when you put compost or manure or an organic meal like blood meal or feather meal or kelp meal, these are nutrients. These are organic materials that have nutrients in them, but they're not immediately available to the plant to be able to uptake through their root system. So when you put these on the soil, you're really feeding the soil biology that is going to consume the meals, consume the organic matter in the compost and the manure, and then those microbes process it and then deliver plant available nutrients right into the plant rhizosphere, which is the sort of sheath that surrounds the plant roots. It's the incredible world of soil biology. Just a tiny little glimpse into it. And so the organic approach is microbe friendly. We're not really trying to supply large amounts of water soluble nutrients. If we are, it's because they're already existing naturally. Like with chicken manure, there is an amount of urea or just water soluble nitrogen that is immediately available to plants. And in fact, it's quite a bit. And so that's why we don't apply raw chicken manure to the field. We want to compost it first and kind of process it, and the microbes, help deal with it basically. And then you can apply that compost and manure to the field for the microbes to be able to deliver to your plants. So that's the organic approach, much more preferable. And really what we do here is we're just applying compost or aged manure once per planting. And so that could be once per season. But if you're growing a little bit more intensively and you're flipping your beds, right, you're terminating the crops after harvesting, and then you plant a new crop in there, you might top dress the soil with some more organic material, such as a nice compost. So those are the two kind of most, I'd say, mainstream approaches right now. I don't know if I've seen, it's probably just my algorithms, but I don't really see that many people trying to sell you on synthetic fertilizer. Everyone kind of knows what it does, and it will get you results, but it just leads to long-term atrophy for your soil microbes. And the organic approach is really popular right now, especially with Charles Dowding, who just is touting put compost on your garden beds because it really works, or just a lot of people in the market gardening sphere have influenced home gardening, putting down large amounts of compost and feeding the soil biology. There's kind of a growing awareness of all of that. But what we're talking about here today is kind of the next step in the process of feeding your plants. And so we've got the conventional approach, we've got the organic approach, and now when we get into Korean natural farming, there's this thing called the nutritive cycle that we follow. And this has been so confusing to me in the past because it's hard to kind of get a straight answer from practitioners about how this works. And it's because it's a theory. It's still kind of in the works, and it doesn't quite apply exactly intuitively in every single situation. And so I just wanted to spend some time kind of talking about it and theorizing a little bit and hearing from you guys what you think. And there is a lot of really interesting kind of ideas to this. So if you are just tuning in, it would be great to hear where you're growing from, where you're tuning in from, what you're growing on. And it seems like we've got Storybox Maker. Thanks for tuning back in. Appreciate you coming back. Growing in Phoenix, 9B, bought the book. Thank you so much. Thanks for buying it. Guys, that's awesome. Appreciate the support. Storybox Maker, send me an email, taylor@thegriffinfamilyfarm.com, and give me your review. I would love to post that on my website. That would be awesome. Yes. Or if you bought it on Amazon, leave me a review there. Okay. Ask your questions in the comments, and I'm going to get to them toward the end. Super appreciate everyone tuning in, and then we'll get to those questions. But I want to kind of get into the nutritive cycle theory now. So in the book, I have this really fancy diagram that, let's see if I can find it. Yes, this guy right here. Crazy. So there's 5 cycles, or 5 stages rather, within the life cycle of a plant. And we've got the germination stage, where your plant is, or your plant is in the seed, and the seed's metabolism wakes up and it stimulates root growth. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Second stage would be vegetative growth, and this is where the plant is just putting on above ground biomass or plant debris, and you're trying to kind of grow big and basically be able to do as much photosynthesis as possible. And so if you think about a tomato plant, I mean, tomatoes are just such a commonly grown plant, really fun to grow and work well. So I'll just use a tomato plant as an example. But that tomato seed is going to germinate if you grow it from seed in your pot or in your soil block or wherever. And then right away, it just starts sprouting up and creating these leaves, and it doesn't necessarily produce flowers right away. So it needs to get to a certain size before it can kind of feel like it's time, the appropriate time. And then we've got that transition period. And the transition period is kind of when the buds are forming and the flowers might just start to be able to start opening, and it's those yellow flowers. And then after that, we get into the reproduction stage, which is where it's producing the tomatoes. That's the fruit that you eat. And really, like, the way it's functioning for the plant is that's its way of producing its seeds so that its line can continue. And so during the transition and kind of the reproduction phases, obviously we've also got pollinators coming in and helping fertilize the plants. And then after reproduction, we've got what's called senescence, and that's just the aging and ripening stage. And so it's kind of coming to the end of its life cycle, and it's going to drop its fruit soon so that it can self-seed. So we've got these 5 stages, and I'm going to use a couple analogies here I'll take a step to the side and say my first analogy to this would be like bike gear shifting. So bear with me. When I was a kid, got my first bike ever, my first gear bike ever, I can remember pedaling crazy fast and going nowhere because I was stuck in a high gear. And raise your hand in the comments if you ever did that, where or if you've seen someone do that, where they're just pedaling on a flat ground and they're going nowhere. I think that's a high gear. Hopefully I don't have that opposite. And you need to shift to a lower gear so that for every rotation of the pedals, you get propelled further. So there's a right gear to shift into for if you're going on flat ground, if you're going downhill or going uphill. If you're going uphill on your bike, you don't want to be in a low gear because your thighs are going to start burning, and you actually want that. You want to be able to pedal and get a lot of rotations in because it's just easier on your body. If you're going downhill or straight, you want to have a higher gear because You don't want to be maybe just propelling yourself at, I don't know. I'm clearly not a biker these days. Another example would be like, we just had Cassidy and I just had our third kid, and about 7 months ago. And when Cassidy was pregnant, as is the case with all pregnant women, they have increased nutritional needs while pregnant. So it's not a good idea, for instance, to practice something like intermittent fasting when you're pregnant. At least most people will tell you that. You want to actually supply your body with a lot of nutrients. Not speaking from experience, but if you're a woman and you are growing a baby, you need extra nutrients. So different nutritional needs at different stages of life. One more example, because I'm on kids. We've got our kids, and it's so obvious when they're growing, because they literally will grow their bellies and they'll eat like a ton and their bellies just pop out. And we can tell right when they're about to grow, because their bellies will get big, and then like a couple days later, they'll flatten out and they'll lengthen. And so, babies can literally grow like an inch overnight when they cluster feed. So anyway, different stages, and for different needs during different stages of all sorts of different things. Is the same thing with plants. So nutritive cycle theory just acknowledges that plants seem to have different stages of development, and that they might need different nutrients or stimulants at different times. So we've got this thing called the maintenance solution. And this simply refers to the spray that you apply to your plants when you're doing Korean natural farming. And so, the cornerstone of KNF is indigenous microorganisms, but then you've got these 8 other nutrients that are going to provide trace nutrients at critical stages. You're going to stimulate mild plant defense responses, and you're going to help your plants with overall hormone regulation. Okay. Providing trace nutrients at critical stages, stimulating mild plant defense responses, and helping with your plant's overall hormone regulation. And that's all going to happen when you spray certain things on your plants. So a quick rundown of all of the inputs. You've got your indigenous microorganisms. That's your first and most important thing. That's mostly for soil application, but you do apply it foliarly at times. And then we've got our fermented plant juice and fermented fruit juice. We've got lactic acid bacteria, water-soluble calcium acetate and phosphate, fermented fish amino acids, oriental herbal nutrient, and vinegar and seawater or salt water. So those are the 9 inputs. For fermented plant juice and fermented fruit juice are counted as the same. So when you're applying these, we got this direct question recently on a video, is when do you apply what? When? What? And and so we're talking about that right now. So no matter what stage your plant is growing, we always are applying our oriental herbal nutrient, OHN, and lactic acid bacteria, or LAB. There's really no time that you don't want to apply those to your plants, because the oriental herbal nutrient is giving your plants an immune boost, and your lactic acid bacteria is crowding out the space on the seed, on the foliage, on the fruit from pathogens. So it's going to acidify the environment in a unique way, and it's going to crowd out bad bacteria and fungi from dominating your plants. Vinegar is also applied pretty much all the time. You can scale it back during the transition to flowering and in the flowering stages, but otherwise it's great to use all the time. And I always say this every single time, but I'll say it again. You always are applying these inputs at greatly diluted amounts. So 1 to 500 for lactic acid bacteria and vinegar. And for OHN, it's 1 to 1,000, or even more diluted. So it's very small amounts of these compounds. The main things that are going to change within the nutritive cycle application schedule are going to be your fermented plant juice and fermented fish amino acids. Those get swapped for your water-soluble calcium phosphate and calcium acetate. Big words here. So fermented plant juice, that's when you extract minerals and nutrients and enzymes and growth hormones from fresh, the first plants and weeds that spring out of the ground during your growing season. You extract that with brown sugar, the classic osmotic pressure extraction. Fermented fish amino acids is just decomposed fish in brown sugar. And those are meant to stimulate and really help with the early growth stages. But later on, we're going to need our water-soluble calcium phosphate and acetate. And then fermented fruit juice can also go in for the later stages. But I've kind of picked up mixed signals on that one. I think it needs a little bit of trialing. All of this needs trialing. So that's why I'm telling you guys about it, so you can trial it and tell people how amazing it is or how terrible it is. But we'll just go over all of the kind of different stages. And there's the 5 stages of the plant life cycle, but within there's kind of some extra little tidbits. So like the pre-season soil drench. You're just going to apply all of your inputs. There's no reason to hold back, to my knowledge. Of course, continue to dilute them, but you can spray all of your inputs on your soil in the weeks, the months leading up to actually planting. So feel free to use everything then. For germination, when your seeds are getting started, you are going to apply fermented plant juice, oriental herbal nutrient, vinegar, and lactic acid bacteria, if you got it. And those are specifically kind of tuned. Those are going to supply the right things to basically stimulate these plant growth hormones at the right time. It's going to help kickstart the metabolism within the seed. It's going to cue microorganisms that are living inside the seed and on the coating. It's going to soften the seed cell, or the shell rather, the shell cells, and it's going to give you a great start to the growing, to that plant actually starting to grow. So fermented plant juice, and I'll actually just copy paste this list into the chat once we end here, or once I get through this. So then in the vegetative growth stage, once your plants have germinated and they're sprouting up and maybe you're planting them to the ground, you're going to continue applying your fermented plant juice, and you can apply some fermented fish amino acids. And then the rest stay the same. You got your oriental herbal nutrient, your vinegar, and your LAB, lactic acid bacteria. Once you start noticing that your plants are transitioning to flowering, like they're starting to form the buds, you want to start maybe working out the fermented plant juice, and you could bring in the fermented fruit juice if you've got it. The main thing that you're really swapping the fermented plant juice for, though, is the water-soluble calcium phosphate. Because as plants are starting to form their buds and their flowers, they need phosphorus. So vinegar can stay, or you can take it out. You can continue to apply your OHN and your LAB. And then as you get into your plants, get into the flowering and pollination stage, then you've got fermented fruit juice, oriental herbal nutrient, water-soluble calcium phosphate stays, and then you add in water-soluble calcium acetate and lactic acid bacteria, as always. As your fruit is developing and setting, you're going to take out the calcium phosphate, keep in the calcium acetate. You can add in some seawater or salt water. Again, people get freaked out when I talk about adding salt water or seawater to the soil or to the plants. It's such a small amount. You're not going to dehydrate your plants when you dilute it properly. And then when we get into the ripening and maturation stage, we basically are going to stay the same. You can take out the seawater unless you are, I don't know, you get the sense that your soil and plants need more minerals. But that is the gist of it. And let me just, let me see if this copy pastes into the chat. For some reason that looks sketchy. Hold on. Okay, it's making me do it in two. There you go. That might be unreadable. But you can go back and rewatch that if you want. So, what needs some trialing and experimentation from this? I would say and this is something that I'll be trialing a lot this season. Cassidy and I are going to be growing flowers. And I think with flowers, I mean, this can totally apply, like especially as you're getting into applying the water-soluble calcium phosphate, WCP. I'm excited to see how that just enhances the plant's ability to produce the flowers. But for plants like leafy greens or non-fruiting veggies, my guess is that you're kind of limiting the calcium and fermented fruit juices, or maybe you're even just you could take it out all the way, or you could just scale it back. If the tissues of the plants are like super floppy, you could consider working in some more calcium. But my guess is that you're just trying to get them to put on more vegetative growth because it's leaves that you're growing. So your lettuces, kales, salad mixes, all of that probably are just going to be good for receiving the fermented plant juice and fermented fish amino acids. For indeterminate vining plants like tomatoes or peppers or cucumbers, squash, this is an interesting one because, normally, like for like a fruit tree, for instance, like an apple tree, you can see when the buds are starting to form, and maybe you want to start transitioning to giving it more calcium phosphate. And then you can see when the apples are starting to grow, and you're signaling to your tree or your fruit bush that you need more calcium. But with indeterminate vining plants, where your tomatoes are growing and they're forming new flowers, at the higher branches, and then they're forming fruit at the lower branches and stuff. It's like, when do you apply different things? When do you cycle out fermented plant juice and cycle in water-soluble calcium phosphate? And my thought here, from what I've heard and what I've personally practiced, is that you just pulse. You kind of, keep track of what you apply when and how your plants respond. But you can apply, your fermented plant juice and fermented fish amino acids 1 week, and then the next week you try taking those out, give them some calcium phosphate and acetate. And so, for determinate varieties, it's the same as fruits. You can just see when they're starting to form their fruits, and then you just switched over to calcium. But for these indeterminate kind of vining plants, or plants that are just produced gradually and they produce flowers while some fruit is still ripening, you probably are just going to go back and forth and once you start getting some fruit. So those are two kind of like, maybe hiccups within the nutritive cycle theory that need some fine tuning. And I'm excited to kind of check that out for myself. As far as getting really practical here, and this is something that I recommend in the book. For those of you who are just tuning in, this is my amazing, incredible work that I just produced last month, and appreciate you guys buying that and supporting the channel. A lot of hard work went into that. There's actually nothing like remarkably special about it. Just that there's like clear pictures, and okay, I'm gonna stop selling it. Pick a day of the week when you are in the growing season. Have your inputs ready, and then just pick a day of the week. Maybe it's Monday. You get to start work late, and you just you have that morning where you apply your inputs to your garden. And getting really practical, I'd say if you can keep a set of measuring instruments that are designated for that task, you've got your exact, write down how much you need to mix into however much, if you got a 2-gallon sprayer or half-gallon sprayer, do the measuring, the calculations in advance, do the math once, don't try and remember it in the spot, and then have your measuring instruments ready to just mix your inputs, and then you can apply those to your plants that morning. I always recommend applying your inputs in the morning or in the evening, because you don't want the sun scorching your plants right after you sprayed them with beneficial things, because it could potentially burn them, but it could also just evaporate the nutrients and the enzymes and microbes before they actually get infused. Also, and this is might be obvious, but I'll just say it for people who don't know, you typically want to apply all of your inputs, your foliar sprays, to the bottom of plant leaves if you can, because that's where they absorb most of it and kind of continue to it shields it from the sun and all of that. So apply it in the morning or in the evening. Pick a day of the week and a time that you're going to do that, and then keep a designated set of measuring instruments that are just for that task, and apply it in the morning or evening. Now, if you want to take it one step further, you could, and you've got your IMO4, indigenous microorganisms, stage 4, and you want to make some liquid IMO. Then what you do is you just pick your time that you're going to apply it, and then count backwards 36 hours and start your batch of liquid IMO. This is an aerated compost tea, essentially. And you can just add in those nutrients. So if you're into the fruiting stage of your plants, you would add in your water-soluble calcium acetate and your maybe seawater or something into that batch of liquid IMO. And then it'll be ready for you to apply whatever morning or evening you chose. If you're in the early growing stages of a plant's life cycle, then you'd use your fermented plant juice and fish amino acids. Okay, that was a good amount of information in 30 minutes. So feel free to ask some questions. I'm just going to scan really quick to see if there are any initial questions. Bobby M. Kearney, when making fermented fish amino acids, FAA, do you need to add IMO, or will it still break down with the sugar? Both are totally great. If you've got IMO4 or IMO2 or whatever, add a little bit in there, and it will help decomposition the anaerobic or facultative microbes. We're gonna kickstart that decomposition process for you. So that is totally a great addition. If you've got it, you could also add in some lactic acid bacteria in there. No harm in that. Or if you don't have it, you can just do brown sugar. Dre Grows, what's up? If buying compost and it gets frozen during shipping, for example, in Alaska weather, everything gets frozen during shipping to my location. Yep. But is the freezing temperatures beneficial, not beneficial? Yeah, honestly, people get weird here about like, are microbes going to freeze and die, or am I going to dehydrate my microbes if I don't water the soil nonstop? And honestly, like, microorganisms are so resilient. The ice caps are melting, and microorganisms are awakening and starting to digest. They're starting to process carbon dioxide or whatever. So I'd say if your compost freezes, there's not really a harm to the biology in there, at least not a substantial enough one, in my opinion. I would just thaw it out and put it on your garden bed, especially if you're getting it now. Put it down on the soil, and then when it does, it'll, I guess, I don't know if it's gonna thaw anytime where you're at in Alaska, but it's always nice to get the work done in advance when you're not growing. And then if it does thaw sometime during this winter, then the microorganisms and the organic matter is going to gradually integrate itself into your soil. So no problem, in my opinion, getting frozen. Storybox Maker, moringa leaves I'm confused on brown sugar additions and if yeast addition is needed. My banana FFJ came out great. I made way too much, not realizing the dilution amounts. Yeah, I mean, fermented fruit juice, fermented plant juice, it's a great all-purpose thing. I mean, you use it when you make IMO 3 and beyond, and so it's not terrible to have a bunch of it. You can always compost excess. But for the moringa leaves, you're confused on brown sugar additions. Yeast is not needed. You don't need to add anything else. It's just the natural. It's going to contain natural yeasts on the leaves, and from the air, and all the microorganisms you need are going to be right there. If there's a more specific question there that you've got, feel free to ask it. But you don't need to add any more. And then Storybox Maker, thanks for chiming in again. Should we add several drops of dish soap to our foliage sprays to assist sticking to the leaves? You totally can. Yeah. If you've got a clean dish soap, especially, probably don't use Dawn, but if you could find like the Ecos brand, it's not too bad. And then the, or 7th generation, just free and clear. Those are great. You can, if you want to go crazy, you can make the Jadam wetting agent. And that's just kind of the same thing. It's just like a really clean soap, a Castile soap that you can make. But yeah, totally. Add a few drops to help it to stick and spread out on the leaves. And Sakshat Karan, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for I'm gonna butcher your name. I'm doing this live. Yep. You're asking a question. I appreciate that. Once we get through KNF steps, we don't need fertilizer or any kind of organic products, right? So yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, I would say, in my opinion, I don't think you need fertilizer once you've got your green natural farming stuff. It's not really a one-for-one replacement because you're curating the biology of the growing space that's on your plants and in the soil. And so the need for these synthetic fertilizers goes down because you've got microbes processing the nutrients for you and delivering those. For the organic products, I don't really apply meals. That would be the feather bone meal, blood meal, kelp meal. I do use those for some things. If I'm brewing up a batch of liquid IMO, I'll maybe feed the fungi in there with some kelp meal. But the one thing that I would say that you probably could supply would be some compost. If you have got established garden beds, just top dressing with some homemade compost with like an inch or 2, or however many centimeters that is, 2 to 5 centimeters or something. I think it's gonna, I don't know, but I think that's probably a good call. Or if you're just chopping and dropping a ton of plant material onto your plants, or you're mulching with an organic mulch, then that's another way. But I think you might need to be resupplying your soil with kind of some organic material as you're taking out nutrients through the plants that you're growing. Yes. Renee Bulkley, you're welcome. All right. Odd 9866. Hello, y'all. I was personally a bit disappointed by the complexity of some of those recipes and the real efficacy when apple, like the eggshell vinegar. Okay, so apple, yeah. So I'm going to interpret the question a little bit and tell me if I got this wrong. But it sounds like you're a little bit frustrated with how complex it all is. So yes, it is a complex system. Like making the 9 inputs. Why are there 9? I don't, I'm thinking that it's because we're kind of covering our bases. That's really what I've drawn from it. But it is a lot. It's totally can feel burdensome. And especially then when you get into trying to apply and shift season stage to stage, that can feel cumbersome. I totally can hear that. And so all I would say is that, man, if you have got some inputs, just use what you got and see how your plants respond to it. If you can soak some eggshells in vinegar for a couple weeks and then extract that, just pour it off, and then you've got some water soluble calcium acetate, then, and that's what you got, then try using that. And if you can make some fermented plant juice and that's all you feel like you're really up to making, then that's great. And I would say, like, just try it out and see how your plants respond. If everything's going all right, then maybe you don't even need any of this. But for for kind of taking it to the next level, and experimenting, that's just something that interests me, and I think maybe interests a number of people on this channel. But that's the sort of stuff that we're just tinkering here and kind of trying out and running trials and seeing if there are any substantial takeaways from this stuff. It's kind of it's intuitive in the sense the nutritive cycle theory is intuitive, just that sure, plants need specific nutrients or enzymes at specific times during their life. And what we're doing when we apply these inputs is we're just cueing our plants to move into that stage. It's like giving them the nudge, the biological or hormonal nudge that they need. And I've got a question that came before we started the live stream that I'll get into a little bit more of that. But I think that, if you are overwhelmed and confused by any of this information, just like try making one input and see how your plants respond next growing season. That's what I got. Totally okay if you don't want to get into everything all at once. So, yeah. First of all, I was like all in KNF energy, but then, well, in the end, I think most time just overthinking it. Yeah, totally. Easy to overthink. And it's still like, as long as it's been practiced, I think that for Western growers like myself, it's just still so new. And it's not really, I don't know if there's really a one for one in my growing culture for a lot of this stuff. It's so confusing when I try to explain this to people who like relatives or friends or something. I lose them at soil biology, but if I start, talking about any of this stuff, it's pretty incoherent to most people, I think. But maybe over time, over the next 70 years, which is my goal, we will just shift the needle in the right direction. So, Teats Treats, thanks for tuning in again. Appreciate you coming back. You said, yes, it is complex. Yes, Mr. Griffin and others speak way above my level. Man, I don't claim to be above anyone's level for this. My main advantage is that I'm just willing to make videos about it and try stuff. So, yeah. Anyway, appreciate you tuning in, guys. Hey, if you are just tuning in, it'd be great to hear from where you are growing in the world and a little bit about what you're up to growing and what your goals are. I'd love to hear from you guys. Diod, weed, and citrus. There you go. Thanks for sharing that. And salt. Yep. Sak shot. Kareen Dakar. Can you tell me what kind of fruit and veggies do you produce in your garden? Well, so we just moved, and so we're going to be dropping this. I'm actually just about to record a video later today talking about our upcoming plans, but we're starting a micro flower farm. So that's going to be the main thing that we're growing, is just cut flowers that we'll try and sell to florists. As far as veggies, we've grown pretty much everything. I mean, all the standard stuff in the past: tomatoes and cucumbers and zucchini, other squash, and cabbage and peppers, all sorts of good stuff. We had some blueberry bushes at our old house, and they got taken over and or they got, I don't know, they were neglected by our renters who were living there. But now we're moving back, and so we'll probably start up. I mean, we've grown raspberries and strawberries and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, but right now, I mean, it's pretty wintry where we're at in Spokane, Washington, Zone 6B. So, Teats Treats, you did not come across as negative at all. Appreciate you. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so a couple questions that we got. Brian Siebert, 192. Thanks for asking or for sharing again. And you said, this was, I think, in response to my post about the live stream. You said, curious if you know, will an appreciable amount of the nutrients within vermicompost leach out during the winter when applied in the fall zone 5A? My worms generate 300 to 500 pounds of vermicompost a year, and I use them quite freely. So this fall, I used close up to 30 gallons of stored vermicompost in my garden. That's crazy. It's awesome. I mean, I'm curious how many square feet you're growing on. That's kind of my next question: is how much, how far is this getting spread? And so then you said after laying down all the green chop and drop sprinkled vermicompost, leaf mold, covered with a decent layer of shredded leaves. So you're doing some lasagna gardening, which is awesome. On top of that, we're expected to get 5 to 10 inches of snow starting tomorrow. And then you say, my thought process is, even though many microbes become dormant in winter, a lot do not. Sure, yeah, true. With the leaves and the snow insulating the biology to a certain extent, I just figure I will be a bit ahead of the game come springtime. That is the right attitude to have. If you can get your worm castings out on the soil, I wouldn't worry about your microbes freezing, as already alluded to, or already mentioned. And same with nutrients. I mean, I kind of already touched on this, but for anyone tuning in, if you apply compost or vermicompost, vermicastings, right now, and you aren't going to plant for another 6 to however many months, it's not as though those nutrients are just going to leach away altogether. The microorganisms are going to be processing them, but the organic matter is going to stay, and it's going to be a long-term, like a more of a slow release fertilizer, because it contains a lot of water insoluble nutrients. That's the technical way, at least that I see it. And so if you were to like spray an NPK, 10-10-10, a Miracle-Gro fertilizer on your garden right now, yeah, those nutrients would probably leach away and you wouldn't get any of the benefits from them. But when you're applying organic material or worm castings or whatever it is, those are probably safe. That's my current knowledge on that topic. Correct me aggressively in the comments if I'm wrong. Yes, Chris Murphy commented in response to this video coming out, and you said, I admit that I rarely apply inputs unless there's a problem. I think I'm just lazy. Lately, I don't even feel like watering them. Dude, completely okay. As I mentioned already as well, there's no reason to be bogged down by this stuff. If it is interesting to you and you want to, or maybe if you're just like struggling in your garden and you want to try something to get it to work, then dive in, try it out, try stuff. But if everything's working, you're happy with the results, why change anything? So it's all right to be lazy once in a while. Got a recurring question from Joni Buss, and we covered this in our recent vinegar video, but Joni Buss, you asked a couple times recently, vinegar, when and why do I use it? Pretty confusing input, at least at first. When I first was told that you could spray vinegar on your plants, it's like, okay, I thought that was a natural weed killer. So why am I applying it to the plants that I want to keep alive? And it's, again, just comes back to we're applying it at just really small amounts, like homeopathic levels. These are tinctures. So it's diluted 1 to 500. That's like a tablespoon and a half in my 2-gallon sprayer, I think. I could be wrong. And that being said, why apply it? Well, vinegar is what we call a hormetic stressor. It's going to provide a hormetic stress to our plants. So getting a little nerdy here, sorry, people. But some examples for humans, for instance, there's this thing called environmental hormesis, right? So that's like cardiovascular activity. If you go running, there's a stress response that your body exhibits. You feel stressed out in some way physically. If you do a sauna, you've got some physical and maybe some mental stress induced. Cold exposure, same thing. Breath work regimens like these. So like breath work, if you do certain breath work techniques, I love doing breath work. It helps, I think, manage stress and just makes me feel good. But if you activate your diaphragm, you're deliberately activating a stress response. And then when you do that, you're able to actually just be present with it and kind of acknowledge it. So you're building some mental resilience. Same thing with cold exposure therapy or sauna. You're just building mental resilience. Like, I am okay. My body is freaking out, but I'm going to choose to take hold of my autonomic nervous system and I'm in control. So for plants, when we provide mild environmental stress, such as applying vinegar at a very low dilution rate, a very heavily diluted, we're generating a really small controlled burst of reactive oxidative stress or oxygen species. And these stress signals get, the alarm bells go off in the plant at a mild amount. So it doesn't cause any widespread damage. It's basically just like, oh, something doesn't feel right. And so the plant switches on antioxidant enzymes. It's going to produce just protective metabolites. And all of those responses are going to improve its stress tolerance. Again, I apologize for getting nerdy here. As far as I know, this is kind of how it works and why. I mean, because applying vinegar to your plants or applying like, OHN that has a small amount of alcohol, it's like, gosh, is that going to dehydrate it or is that going to just like stress it out and kill it? Again, these small amounts, you're just signaling to the plant to defend itself. Another thing that happens when you spray vinegar and some of these other things on your plants is that they are going to signal through their root exudates that they need help from the soil microbes. And so vinegar stimulates certain root exudates to be released. And those root exudates are attracting specific immune boosting microorganisms. And so to recap, I mean, when you apply vinegar to plants, you're activating specific metabolic responses, mild oxidative stress. And it's kind of like if you're lifting weights, your muscles really hurt. And then I clearly don't lift weights, but you guys get what I'm talking about. If you lift weights, so I've heard, your muscles feel really painful and then they regrow stronger. That's like, basically what's happening when you apply vinegar. So there you go. Teeth Treats, thank you so much. Wow, I'm just tuning back into the chat. Such a sweet person to donate to me. I didn't even ask for it. Thank you. You said starting my first minimal hot compost pile, 3 foot by 4 feet by 5 feet tall. I don't have enough materials to fill my area. How long can I just add on top to fill? Okay. And we've already got some comments from Diod coming in. You said it depends on the amount that you want to work with. You can add material until fully full and then just turn it from time to time, add worms after the hotness. Yep, I agree with all of that. So yeah, so Teach Treats, feel free to clarify. I'll just hop in here too. If you're talking about you made your first like a bay that is those dimensions, the 3 feet by 4 feet by 5 feet tall, and then you just don't quite have enough to fill it up to the top, then yeah, you can totally just add as you go. If you're talking about not making enough hot compost for your area, then um, but you don't have enough materials to compost themselves, how long can I just add on top to fill? I mean, you can, like, whatever you can make, and you just spread it thin. Whatever compost you make, I'm a firm believer that for most people, if they make their own compost, it's going to be more microbially rich and valuable um, of a material than if you buy it from the store or buy it in bulk. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with buying it from the store or buying it in bulk. You just can't expect the same microbiology to be present in there. It's probably going to be a little bit less nutritional. And so what I like to do for my compost, I like to pretty much reserve most of my homemade compost, at least right now, for my potting mix, because I just believe in the compost I'm making. I'm weird like that. And and then that, for me, that just means that I'm supplying my plants with the greatest start to their life. And yes, so yeah. So if you don't have enough materials to fill that space, just add until you got enough and it fills all the way up, and then aerating it by flipping, as they just call it, flipping, like you're mixing it up, is gonna maybe even help that to heat up. And yeah, that's great. And then you just might need to let that cold compost for a little while longer. And I would agree with Diod, add worms after it heats up and cools down, because you don't want to roast your worms. There you go. All right, Sakshat, what is Amish method of growing plants? Might have to be more specific. I'm not exactly sure what the Amish, if there is an Amish method for growing plants, but I would love to learn about the Amish method. They probably are killing it. I just am not aware. Don't know. Teach treats. I don't have enough material to fill my space. Yeah. I'm afraid it will hot compost. Oh, wait, why are you afraid that it'll hot compost? You can clarify. I'm not sure. Yes. So another question that I got recently that's kind of related to this topic is, I've got old batches of my KNF inputs, and they seem to have gone bad. Like they're growing mold or something, or maybe they're just maybe they're not growing anything bad. They're just like really old. What do I do with them is the question. Should I toss them, or should I use them, or whatever? So my recommendation for any time that it's like the back of the fridge phenomenon. If you have that Tupperware that's just hanging out in the back of the fridge and you don't want to look at it because you know that it's probably growing mold, so you just put it off. And sorry, this is more autobiographical than actually helpful, but if you've got those inputs, we've all got them somewhere. There's just a bucket of rotting weeds in water. I'd say for your fermented plant juice and lactic acid bacteria and water-soluble calcium acetate and phosphate, if they're smelling funky, like bad funky or moldy, or if they're growing mold, I'd just toss them, just compost them, pour them on your soil somewhere. And because they're pretty easy to make, and they can go funky if you don't keep them in the right conditions, like if they overheat, or if they, I don't know, got some debris in them and start to mold. So I'd just toss those. I mean, your Oriental herbal nutrient, your vinegar, and your fermented fish amino acids shouldn't go bad. They're, especially OHN and vinegar, they've kind of got self-preservational qualities built in. So those shouldn't ever go bad. In fact, they get better with age. For fermented fish amino acids, I want to say it's a similar thing. Be careful where you store that, just so that you don't ruin a batch, because it takes so long to make. But otherwise, that's what I'd say. So, yeah. Teats treats, I'm afraid it will cold compost. Yeah. Same with diod. Cold compost is not bad. It's actually great because you're probably retaining more of the nutrients. It just means that it'll decompose more slowly into finished compost. So if you're starting to pile now, you know what you can do, Teats Treats, is if you just accumulate plant debris and it's cold composting, and then meanwhile on the side, I've actually done this a number of times. On the side, you collect bokashi food scraps. Maybe you're not into bokashi yet, but if you want to get into it, winter is a great time to do that. And you can just do it with lactic acid bacteria or buy a bran or make your own bran, whatever you want. You can stockpile bokashi food scraps any time of the year, and that's a nitrogen source. So then once you've got enough of them and you've got enough material in your compost bay, if it's still cold, then you just do two things. You aerate it by flipping it. Sorry, three things. Aerate it by flipping it over, and then gradually mix in your bokashi food scraps for a source of nitrogen. And then you might need to water it down a little bit if it's dry. That's the optional third thing. And your pile should heat up on its own. You should be able to actually, get those higher temperatures. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. I've done that multiple times to heat up a compost pile, or maybe I didn't add enough nitrogen at first and I had too many woody materials in there that were soaking up the nitrogen. You can always give a little boost, or I've heated up a compost pile that's gone cold with comfrey leaves, or grab some of the neighbor's lawn clippings or something. There's ways to do it, and then you can get those thermophilic temperatures. So, yep. $20 just to see someone tossing trash. Expensive indeed. Stop trolling. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, guys, this was fun. Thank you for tuning in. If you are just tuning in and you're catching the tail end of this, watch the whole thing. I think we got through some good stuff. I hope this is going to be a really valuable video, maybe one that you'll return to as you get into the next growing season, or maybe if you're growing in the Southern Hemisphere in Australia. I've got a couple of emails from you guys recently. Thanks for emailing me. Thanks for sending me your IMO collections. Guys, if you want to get into Korean natural farming, my shameless plug once again, buy my book, please. A Home Gardener's Guide to Korean Natural Farming. It's linked in the description. You can get it in ebook or paperback. Would super appreciate the support. And if you don't want to, don't worry about it. You can check out all of our videos on YouTube. I'm not holding anything back that I'm revealing in the book. So appreciate you all. Teats Treats, thanks again for the donation. Appreciate that. Thanks, Diod, for all the comments, and Sockshot, and everyone else who I missed. Thank you, guys. Appreciate y'all. All right. See you next week.